Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Satria Akbar from English Educational Student 20 with study number 26. I will explain about language change and linguistic historical. Language change occur across all level of language, including sound, words, and grammar. At the end of the Old English period, English speakers dropped a lot of suffixes, changing the language grammar. So, while language can change in multiple ways, they don't always change in all areas at once. Many newer speakers of a language can mistake one word for something else or reanalyze the language. Sometimes the innovation happens because people need the language to work better for them. Language change is typical incremental, but sometimes there is a situation that is perfect for creation of an entire new language. There were deaf people, sure, but because a lack of structures support, they stayed at home in their village and didn't share a common language. The curriculum of the school didn't try to teach the kid of sign language. Instead focusing on spoken Spanish, lip reading, and some finger spelling of Spanish words. But the students were signing with each other anyway, and they wove together bits of their individual home sign into a richer, more complicated system, something closer to a language. They made uh, they made it into a full-fledged language, one that had a complex and systematic grammar like any other language. In this case, the student created what now known as a ESN, or Idioma de Señas de Nicaragua, the official Nicaragua Sign Language. Nicaraguan Sign Language is a unique example. A more common observational type of language change occur because of language contact, which is when languages in the same area influence each other. It's very common for language to come in contact with other language. When languages are in contact, there are broadly two possible ways. They can influence each other. First, languages can become more like each other, that is, they can converge. The area of number of Bantu languages in southwest Zambia that also have cliques, even though this is not a typical feature in Bantu language. The clique in the Zambian Bantu language are a result of long-term contact between Khoisan and Bantu language. In Zambia, our second language can diverge and become less similar. On the northernmost island of the Pacific nation of Vanuatu, there are 17 different languages. These languages are all of part of the Oceanic language family and have a lot in common in terms of their grammar, but have all diverged in their vocabulary. In this context, language contact has made speakers willingly diverge as the change words be more distinct from each other. If two or more languages are not understandable to each other, we say they are mutually unintelligible. When you put a speaker of mutual in unintelligible language together, they use the element of their language to create some basic way to communicating, generally known as a pidgin. If the pidgin is spoken for long enough in a community where children are learning it, they will use the same skill as the Nicaraguan deaf children did to expand into a language. These languages are known as Creoles. When talking about Creole language, we should note that power asymmetry between the people and the language involved. The language contact was usually the result of Western colonization, during which colonists exploited people who spoke other mother language. This power of imbalance explains why a Creole language is often made up of more words from a dominant language. But Creoles are linguists in their own right. But for any are older than that, we have to rely on the writing system for evidence and hope that it reflects major feature of how the language is spoken. The good news is, for language like Tibetan or English for that matter, there are over 1,000 years of writing examples that show us the path of linguistic. Research that look at the change of the happen of language over time with this kind of evidence is called diachronic analysis. When studying variation across dialect or language at the same point in time is known as synchronic analysis. To prove us to prove a relationship between language, historical linguistics make a giant spreadsheet of words that might be related and look for systematic pattern across the world. Because it's the oldest version of Germanic language, we can reconstruct it's known as Proto-Germanic. Well, the Germanic language all have F or V at the start. This more historical distant language with the period of P sound. Since the oldest language start with P, historical linguistics hypothesize that father must have begun with P and later changed to F in the newer Germanic language. If there are only a few similar words, it makes a case of one language borrowing from another, or simply a coincidence that process of methodical piecing together a probably common ancestor language from the existing record is called comparative reconstruction. Comparing unrelated language is interesting too because it can tell us things about language in general. But this is a refer as the linguist typology rather than historical linguistic. It takes a thousand cells in the table contain words like father or padre and father to reconstruct a hypothesized ancestor language called a proto-language. Centuries of dedicated and meticulous work to find, cognate, and understand language chain backward has led to the reconstruction of the Proto-Indo-European language. It was probably spoken around 6,000 years ago by a group of nomadic pastoralists somewhere east of Europe, and evolved into many of languages of Europe at the Indian subcontinent. However, everything we know about their language and culture is only an educated guess. Sometimes, even after years of a careful study, a language doesn't have any evidence of being related to any other language. Near or far, these languages are known as isolates, and examples including Basque in Spain and French, Ainu in Japan and Korean. They might have originated independently, like Nicaraguan Sign Language, or we have most lost all record of their relative. Just like the real horizon, the path a language has taken is no longer visible to us, but there are fewer than 100 known isolated, and many the world, uh, 7,000 languages can be grouped into larger families using methods like comparative reconstruction. It's all of our it's all of my explanation about language change and linguistic historical. Thank you for listening to me. Uh, Goodbye.